it's actually a changing of energy into different forms, and what was waste can be redirected and changed into something that's really very wonderful and productive, and it's cyclic, which is really neat.
¿Esa se te hace bonita? Bueno, vamos a cortarle unas hojas. Estos van en el compost, ¿ah? ¿O tú? Okay. The vegetable garden is very important in my house because we produce very, very little amount of garbage. Before we had to have 3 containers of garbage. Now we only have 1 small container.
Oh, hi, Claudia. Hi. How are you? How are you today? Good. What you doing? Can we hug?
I've got some strawberries growing, I have a peach tree. I also have yarrow, rosemary, some chives, sage, snapdragons, and mint. I like the strawberries, that's because I get to eat them, and I love strawberries. And I really have some beautiful, juicy strawberries come out, especially since I've been adding the compost.
Well, you can't get things in the store that taste like homegrown. When you grow things yourself at home, they tend to be sweeter, maybe juicier. Tomatoes are redder. I like the freshness. The freshness of tomatoes and basil is especially good. There's a lot of aroma that comes through the basil in the cooking, and you get to taste that. For our garden, we have a lot of foods that smell good as well as taste good.
In our own backyards, using materials that we generate from cooking and gardening, we can reduce waste, recycle it, and reap a harvest of homemade compost that is perfect for every kind of gardening project, making even the smallest yard a source of organically grown fruits, vegetables, or flowers. In this program, we'll see how easy it is to compost at home once you've learned a few simple steps. We'll meet 4 Alameda County residents who will show us how they compost and how they use compost around their homes. We'll also see how compost is making a difference beyond our homes and changing the way we recycle and grow our food. Compost, a natural fertilizer and soil amendment that's as old as life itself. All organic matter decomposes. Composting speeds up the process by creating improved conditions for the bugs, worms, and microorganisms that break down organic material. This is a compost pile made with yard trimmings and food waste. Time-lapse photography reveals how the volume of material reduces as it is transformed into compost. Over a 1-month period, the pile was turned and water added once a week. You don't have to make conditions perfect. Composting will happen. Dorothy Meow uses compost in her vegetable and flower beds and as a mulch around her yard.
The compost made a big difference because it really made the soil very friable and held in the moisture, especially during the drought years.
Dorothy has been composting for years. Her style is easy, but she follows some simple rules. She makes sure she keeps a balance between green and brown materials. Greens include grass clippings, fresh plant trimmings, kitchen scraps, and manures from horses, chickens, and other non-meat-eating animals. Greens are rich in nitrogen and are often moist and green in color. Browns include leaves, dead plants, and sawdust from untreated wood. They are rich in carbon and are often dry, fibrous, or woody. The goal is to have about half greens and half browns in your pile. The 3 basic steps are chopping materials, mixing, and maintaining moisture. Let's see how this works, building a new pile from scratch. The bottom layer of a new pile should be coarse material that will keep air at the bottom. Dorothy chops her woody and fibrous brown materials with a kitchen cleaver, using an old stump as a chopping block. Dorothy adds water, a layer of greens, and uses a pitchfork to mix the layers. She repeats the process, mixing greens and browns and adding water. She ends with a layer of browns that help keep flies away from the nitrogen-rich green materials. Her bin allows air to circulate and keeps rodents out. It's a type of bin that can be purchased at a discount from the Alameda County Waste Management Authority and Recycling Board. Every week or two, Dorothy will turn the pile and add water, enough to keep the pile as damp as a wrung-out sponge, providing the air and moisture that stimulate microorganisms to break down material in the pile. The workhorses of a healthy compost pile are the beneficial bacteria and fungi which safely break down plant materials. The action of billions of these microorganisms will heat a compost pile to 140 degrees or more. You may notice actinomycetes in the pile, which is white and webby in appearance. It breaks down woody materials and emits a sweet, woodsy odor like a forest floor.
Well, when I first bought this house, it was 7 years ago, exactly almost 1 year. It used to be a car parking lot in the back, and the earthquake took care of that. So I decided to make a backyard. So I made a lawn so my kid could play. I made a vegetable garden because my wife loves plants. And I made a little barbecue space for me. We haven't bought lettuce since the beginning of the year, since we have the plants. We eat salad every day in string beans, and we get beans and tomatoes this year were very nice.
And I don't like tomatoes.
He doesn't like tomatoes, but we love them. Eileen, come and help me. It's ready, Eileen.
Most people use an add-as-you-go method for their compost. Renee keeps adding materials to his bin after he has started the pile. When adding kitchen scraps, he buries food waste in the center of the pile and then covers it. Burying food waste will keep rodents away and control odors. He coarsely chops materials with his shovel, mixes, and then occasionally adds water. When you keep adding materials to a pile as it's composting, the process of decomposition is slower, and in this process, beneficial organisms like sow bugs, beetles, millipedes, and ants play a key role in breaking down the materials. They chew materials into small pieces and excrete them in forms that are more easily broken down. The most prized workers are earthworms. They digest a wide range of organic matter and help make compost a great source of plant nutrition.
It will happen. Compost happens. That's what's great about the process.
If you're not using kitchen scraps, you can try the low-fuss method like Claudia. Don't add food waste to a low-fuss or an open pile because it can attract rodents and other animals. Although it's always good to have both greens and browns in a pile, Claudia doesn't worry too much about having equal amounts. She coarsely chops and mixes her materials and maintains moisture. She turns the pile every couple of months to make sure that animals don't nest there. With her no-fuss approach, Claudia will be able to harvest her compost in 8 to 12 months.
It makes every meal special knowing that you've grown some of your own food. That's part of the joy of having a garden so close. You just sort of walk from the kitchen to the garden, back to the kitchen, and you're ready to eat.
Compost is the lifeblood of Ward and Cheryl Habriel's garden. For potting soil, working into the garden, and as a mulch, compost keeps their garden healthy, which in turn keeps the Habriels in fresh vegetables year-round. Composting doesn't require much effort. But if you're enthusiastic, you can build a fast pile that can be harvested in less than a month.
For my method, I'm interested in my dry leaves, I'm interested in the branches, these constitute my browns, and grasses. And grasses, leaves, and branches in my yard constitutes the bulk of what I make a pile out of. My process involves chopping these finely. As you can see, my grass are just not individual blades, they're almost powdered. And the reason for that is because I've exposed a lot of the surface area of the carbon and the nitrogen products. That's the browns and the greens. The more surface area exposed with the right amount of air and moisture is what gives me the rapid action and the rapid decomposition, so that the next day when I check it and the temperature is up 50 or 60 degrees, I know I'm on the right track.
Making compost fast requires more effort up front and begins with chopping materials as finely as possible, particularly dry, woody, brown materials. A chipper shredder machine can be used, but Ward just uses his lawnmower, a model designed for mulching as well as mowing. He puts his yard trimmings in the driveway and runs the mower over them. This gives him finely chopped materials that will break down quickly. Ward builds his pile on the same principles that Dorothy does. But because he wants to compost a whole batch at one time, he's saved up enough green and brown materials to fill his bin to the top. Instead of layering, Ward's method of chopping blends the greens and the browns, and he turns and waters more often, making sure that the bacteria and microorganisms in the pile have all the air and water needed to maximize decomposition. When the environment for these microorganisms is kept nearly ideal, as Ward has done, their heightened activity speeds decomposition and raises the temperature of the pile to over 140 degrees, hot enough to give off steam, kill off plant diseases, and weed seeds. Ward builds in batches and doesn't keep adding to his pile.
I just monitor for moisture, come back the next day, and when it reaches 140 degrees or more, then I turn the pile, add more moisture, feel as I go, and that's the process. And through the process, this turns into a rich, black, just wonderful smelling ingredient, which is the primary source of the nutrients that go back into my yard and my garden.
You'll know your compost is ready to harvest when it's rich, brown, and looks like dirt. Dorothy removed this pile from her bin and stopped adding materials to it 3 months ago. She used a tarp to keep rain from leaching the nutrients out of the pile and to prevent it from drying out. Most of the materials are thoroughly broken down. Dorothy picks out a few large pieces, and this compost is ready to be dug directly into the garden bed, where it will improve the health of her soil and provide nutrition for her plants slowly and naturally, without pesticides or fertilizers. She could just as easily use it in a potting mix, like the Habriels for spring bulbs, or Claudia and her husband Ron for repotting plants, or around the root ball of a new tree, like Renee. Claudia's compost is not yet fully decomposed and still has a lot of woody material in it. It shouldn't be dug into the soil just yet, because the woody materials will continue to decompose, robbing nitrogen from the plants. This unfinished compost makes an excellent mulch. Claudia spreads it around the trunk of her peach tree to protect it from heat and frost, to suppress weeds, and to conserve water. Ward's on a fast track with his compost, so he uses a screen to separate out the fine compost from the larger pieces that aren't completely broken down.
It's 17 or 18 days later. The pile has cooled from the 140 to 150 or maybe even 160 range down into a range of less than 100. At that point, I'll harvest it through my screen, filtering out the bigger pieces and saving those for another pile later. And then what I sift through is what I use to stir back into the garden, the flower pots, and the rest of the yard.
The benefits of composting are not limited to the backyard. Modern agriculture is rediscovering compost as a cost-effective farming strategy. The Wente Brothers Winery in Livermore makes compost with leftover grape pomace and chipped yard waste supplied from Alameda County households to enrich their soils, and is in the forefront of the movement towards a more natural and sustainable agriculture.
This is a lot better. We began organic farming about 186 acres back in '89, and one of the things that you have to do is you have to improve the soil. There was a couple of elements that we were needing. Potassium and phosphorus were two of the elements that were low in, and compost is an excellent source for supplying those elements. As you increase the organic matter, you have greater water holding capacity and just more readily available nutrients to the vine. We look at compost as a product or amendment that we can put on the soils to give us that balance in the soil that'll end up giving us balanced wine.
Here are some answers to the most common compost problems. But first, let's review the basics. The 4 ingredients are greens, browns, air, and water. Build the pile to be half green and half brown by volume. The 3 basic steps to building a pile are: chop materials to 6 inches or less, mix materials to add air to the pile and evenly distribute greens and browns, and maintain moisture as damp as a wrung-out sponge. One problem people have with their compost is smell, and that's easy to fix. Compost should smell good. Bad smells are a sign that the pile doesn't have enough air or enough browns and too much green material, like food scraps or grass clippings. To get rid of smells, just add leaves or other dry yard trimmings and give your compost pile a turn. Always cover food scraps or grass clippings with a layer of browns or bury them in the center of the pile. Don't overwhelm your pile with too much food waste. If you have too many grass clippings, you can use them outside the compost pile as a mulch or leave them right on the lawn. The fine pieces of grass settle to the ground where they help hold moisture and put nutrients back into the soil. If you're regularly adding greens such as grass and kitchen scraps, you may not find enough brown materials to add at the same time. Many composters solve this problem by collecting leaves and other brown materials and storing them in a trash bag or an open pile near their compost bin so they can add them as needed. If you can't collect enough browns in your own yard, you may be able to get sawdust from untreated wood at a lumber yard. You can even use small amounts of shredded paper or cardboard. Some people find that their compost is not decomposing fast enough. This usually means the pile is too dry. Particularly in hot areas, a compost pile can dry out, killing off the microorganisms that do the work in the pile. Add enough water to keep the materials as damp as a wrung-out sponge. Slow decomposition can also occur when people throw large woody materials into a pile without chopping them up. The more you chop, the faster the materials will decompose. Inadequate amounts of greens are another potential cause of slow composting. Microorganisms need a balance of nitrogen from greens and carbon from browns. So for a more active compost pile, remember to keep up your greens.
And it's actually fun. You know, it helped me reconnect, I guess you could say, to the earth. I get out there and I do my turning, and that's my exercise for the week, and I just have a good time with it.
Mommy?
Whether it's fresh salads or pasta with tomatoes and basil, fresh salsa or strawberries, healthier trees, flowers, or ornamental plants. Composters reap tantalizing rewards for their recycling efforts. Reducing their waste disposal bills, saving money by replacing soil conditioners and mulches, and by saving water. Dorothy, Ward, Claudia, and Renee are helping the environment by using less garden chemicals, reducing pressure on landfills, and cutting down the pollution generated by transporting and processing their waste. Alameda County households throw away about 1,000 tons of waste every day of the year. Most of it could easily be composted or recycled. Composting makes a difference. Join the 30,000 households in the county who are composting at home. You'll be helping to recycle nature's way, feeding our soil and helping to make our planet healthy. So, do the rot thing. Call the Alameda County Waste Management Authority and Recycling Board hotline at 444-SOIL about a new compost bin, composting classes, locations of demonstration gardens, composting in the schools, or for anything you need to know about composting.
Anyone want to hold these for a second? I've got to grab something. No, I'm joking.